go. All set, Terry? Okay, right. And you want to get that too? Great. Let's roll on along here then. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Nantucket Finance Committee meeting for Monday, January 26th, 2015. On my left, or on the right of your TV screen, the committee members are Joe Grouse, Steve Morey, John Tiffany, Jim Kelly, Cliff Williams, David Worth, Craig Sperry, and Christy Kickham is not in attendance at this time. Is there any public comment for anything that is not on our agenda today? Hearing none, we'll move over for approval of minutes for January 20th. We just got those today, right?
I just got them out today.
Yeah, so we'll take that up again. Give everybody. Yeah, that's fine. No, either way. I just that's fine. We'll get them. All right, we'll move along. Committee reports. The audit committee meeting scheduled for tomorrow is canceled due to the inclement weather, and a date has not been rescheduled at this time? No. Okay. So when that is, and I'll let you know when that is. I have nothing else. Any other committee reports? Okay, hearing none. Next item on our agenda is a review of our Island Home fiscal year 2016 budget. And Rachel Creation, thank you for coming. Oh, okay. Sure. The only thing I would ask, Rachel, if you wouldn't mind coming up to speak into the microphone since we are recording. And thank you for coming. I know you've got a lot going on. I imagine this storm doesn't help. Sure. So if you'd like to, we did receive your budget last week, and so if you'd like to give a little overview and then take some questions, that'd be great. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Sure. I don't know how in depth you want me to go on the overview, but
just what you feel necessary. How about that? We're open.
I will let you know that we do have a hanging out there capital project for electronic medical records. We kind of not keep pushing it off, but it's not mandated for long-term care yet, and from what I gather from constituents in the field, it's still a work in progress. They're still working through a lot of long-term care related issues and merging of current softwares and old softwares. So we're just kind of exploring our options still, okay. And it's a little bit more than we originally expected it to. So in the warrant for this annual town meeting, we have requested a reappropriation for some of that funding. So one of our priorities for FY16 is to start beginning the process of implementing electronic medical records. And we do hope that will help cut down on maybe some of the overtime we might have with paperwork-related things. We don't usually tend to have a lot of nurse-related paperwork overtime, but things with admissions and discharges that take up some extra time, then maybe we're hoping it'll streamline that process. But there will be a learning curve. A few other things that we have going on, just building related things. New life safety codes are coming down. A lot of this relates to our capital though, so we're not really concerned at the impact of anything on our operating budget for 16 because we've already slightly prepared for some of these anticipated changes within our capital. So for the Island Home Enterprise Fund summary, we are looking at a little more for our fiscal 16 budget compared to our fiscal 15 budget. We're looking at $7,430,000. A lot of that increase is mostly just general year-to-year percentage increases for some of our operating salary anticipated increase, medical insurance anticipated increase. Nothing really jumps out year to year that is different than what we're currently doing. We only have one potential increased position that we implemented and built within our budget by taking it out of a contracted vendor and moving it into an actual position at the Island Home. The cost that we equated was actually roughly the same. The only reason why it would be that way is because with the addition of the benefits and things like that, becoming an actual employee, you would go under the union contract, so you wouldn't be paid at the much higher contractual vendor rate. It's almost a half of what the hourly rate is that we're paying them now. So what we might actually anticipate happening is this individual may not agree to try and become a member of the union and do that because of the huge significant cut in pay and stay as a contracted vendor. I don't think it will overly impact what our budget is. The money will just shift from our payroll to operating. So it's not actually an additional position. We were just trying to build it within as a person in the building. And that's in our therapy department. We've always contracted with our therapies, and we were trying to kind of build an actual rehab department. But we have come across a lot of strategic issues internally on how to actually do that. We would almost need a rehab director, but we would want them to be hands-on and also treating patients, and the difference between an hourly rate office manager and somebody that's actually performing the physical therapy services is much different, and we can't really provide them with 2 hourly rates to compensate them for that. So we came across a couple things after we actually started working out the details after it was built in our budget. So other than that, I'm not sure if anybody really has any...
Open for questions.
Open for questions.
All right, we'll
It's
start
kind
there.
of business as usual.
Joe, why don't we start with you? Okay.
Hi, Rachel. I'm Joe
Hi.
Bass. I accept what you say in terms about your expense budget. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the revenue versus expense,
Sure.
which is it's a couple of pages further on, but it looks like you're forecasting a fairly dramatic decline in revenue for RL and Home, and as I read the numbers, you're requiring a big subsidy
Yeah,
from
I
retained
wouldn't-
earnings, which is another question I might have. But so maybe you could just talk about the revenue picture and kind of what you're forecasting and why you're
Sure.
forecasting that.
Absolutely go there. I'm sorry I didn't think to do that. Where's my
It's fine.
paper? I've had a few discussions with town administration related to this within our revenue. Right now, one of the things that we were experiencing, why we are anticipating that large dip, is that within fiscal 14, we ran into a revalidation of our certification for the ability to participate in Mass Health as well as Medicare services. What ended up happening is both agencies required revalidation applications to be filled out in order to continue providing as a provider. We ran into a lot of issues with our Medicare revalidation application because since its onset of applying in 2007, we never had to do a revalidation. So there was a lot of information that we coordinated with finance and things like that to get them, and it got hung up for a very long time. After multiple inquiries, it came to find out that they were just, because this was the first year that they've asked all facilities to do it, they were so backlogged and didn't have the manpower, it caused us to backlog our revenue. So we weren't able to appropriately bill, even though we were continuing to provide the services. So what that did within our fiscal 14 is it slightly dropped some of our, was it on 14?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at our Medicaid A revenue, our Medicaid B revenue, we experienced a pretty significant dip even in our private patient pay revenue for fiscal 14. That was a census mix, not a revalidation issue. So what we've been doing in 15 is we totaled it up to be about $65,000 just in secondary insurance, and then a significant chunk in Medicare A and B that we are currently backlog billing. But because of the way the Department of Revenue certifies our budget, when we build 16, it's based on 14 actuals. So because we didn't bring in what we actually should have in 14, it caused a drop in what they would certify us for 16. So what we'll likely see is because we'll bring in all that extra revenue in 15, they might certify us for a higher than we would actually be able to bring in 17. So because of that year lag and where they'll certify where we're allowed to put our revenue, it's that one dip in what we were able to bill and not bill has created an issue within our being able to actually truly portray what we're bringing in what year. One thing that I have been working with Brian and Martin and town administration a little bit is when we're talking about our current budget, I'm trying to divide out what is funds that we've recouped that should have been brought in 14 and what are current funds that we're recouping in for this year. So that when we say that this last quarter we brought in $75,000 for secondary insurance, this amount was actually what we should have gotten here, and this amount is here. So we kind of keep a running track of what the true, what the Island Homes revenue truly looks like. It's going to mess with our cost report. It's going to mess with our revenue building in the future, in our budgets. It's going to impact our Medicaid rates. It's a problem that we're probably, hopefully, after fiscal 17, will get out of. So it's a little confusing. So one thing within our fiscal 16 budget is there could be areas within our Medicare A and B revenue that we will possibly bring in revenue higher than what we're showing that we have budgeted for.
Okay.
But then again, that obviously, because we can't show that because it's based on 14 actuals, that's increasing our subsidy or our deficit a little bit, since the subsidy isn't increasing any more than.
Okay, so if I understand it, a lot of it has to do with sort of the timing of reimbursement from Medicaid
Yeah.
and other agencies that compensate our Island Home.
Yep, and for our private patients, that's actually a just dip in census.
That was sort of I was just saying, so
Yep.
what is sort of the normal census of the facility and the mix between private pay and I presume it goes up and down, but just.
Yeah, our Medicaid census and our private was less, and what we often run is we run anywhere between 65 and 68% of our census is Medicaid, and we usually have an average of 2 to 3 people on Medicare, so the rest is often private. But one individual that's not on private pay at $420 or $440 a day is roughly $13,000 a month. Over 12 months, that's a significant gouge in our anticipated revenue if we don't get the census where we thought we would. So we had more people that were on Medicaid last year. We also had a very significant period where we had a lower census than expected. I believe for most of the year we were running at maybe 38, 39 of the beds filled compared to, say, 42, 43 on average. So even those few individual people can cause a huge impact on our revenue.
And is 42, 43 sort of full?
Well, we have 45 beds, so
45 beds,
usually
okay.
we kind of bounce anywhere between 42 and 44. We do more short-term Medicare than we used to, so we do tend to admit and discharge faster than we used to in the past. So the average length of stay for a very small amount of our facility, so some days we might have 3 open beds and then we'll fill them, and then so we do a lot more admits and discharges on short-term Medicare than we ever did in the past, but not enough to make money.
Okay. Very good. John?
Yeah. While you're on, you mentioned, I have another question, but you were saying you're at 38 beds now?
We are at 39 right now.
Okay. And you've been averaging 42?
We were averaging 42, 43.
Early part of the year. What's your projection on this revenue for 2016 is, what do you
I
figure?
think what we have built in the budget for 16 is a little bit lower than we will probably be able to actually bring in, but it's hard to prove that, to
Yeah, I
be able to
understand.
prove that we can bring in more.
So you're figuring maybe, 40 for the, or, I mean, I'm just.
As like an average census? I
Yeah.
would say so, yeah.
Okay, for your budget.
Yep.
Okay, now, you were just talking, and what was your assumptions, because I know that there's a huge disparity between what you get for Medicaid and what you get for Medicare and
Yep.
what you get for private.
Right.
I mean, it's like, last time I knew, it was almost, private was like double what you got for Medicaid, I think, or more.
Yeah. Right now, we charge, it's $420 and $440 respectively, but we only have 3 beds that would be charged $440, and that would only be if they're private rooms, and that would only be if we filled them with a private person. They're not designated as private paying only, so somebody could be in there that's Mass Health. This time last year, our average Medicaid or Mass Health payment was about $208, $220, and right now we're averaging $193 a day. And that, a lot of that has to do with our Medicaid rates have also decreased
Okay.
based on the state. We were also averaging about 580 on our Medicare, and our average now is anywhere between 550 and 520
A day.
a day.
Now, so your assumptions in the budget, and I know that the budget's funny because you can't properly, but your assumptions for looking at it, for what you have, is keeping the mix of private, Medicare, and Medicaid about the same?
Yeah. I think I had mentioned a few times, had a few conversations related to this, and even though we anticipate that, this is what we did this is what we should have done in 14, this is what we might do in 15, because our Medicaid and our Medicare rates recently have dropped a little bit, our census has been wacky, our breakdown of census between private, Medicaid, and all that has been off. We left the numbers as they were for revenue in 16 rather than trying to fight the fight saying we can bring in more money because of that type of climate, to keep it as a conservative estimate so that we weren't coming in underneath where we could.
Okay. Jim?
Are you a participant in neighborhood health?
In
Neighborhood health.
neighborhood health?
Did he
I
cover
don't
stuff
believe
like
so.
That is the Medicaid plan that is most of the that's signing up people as a result
Yeah,
of the
we
ACA.
can't though because they don't cover long-term coverage. Usually when neighborhood health comes into our building, we have to start an entire new Medicaid application as a long-term care applicant.
But wouldn't you be able to do?
It's like a community mass health plan. So anybody that comes in with that or community mass health, we still, with a full-blown community mass health, we do a conversion, which is good because it's a little less paperwork. But what we've been experiencing with the neighborhood plan is they are requiring us to do an entire new long-term care application through mass health. And we've been actually starting to file those
wouldn't that be
ourselves.
beneficial? I know at the hospital they're paying us 65 cents on the dollar, which is compared to 25 cents on the dollar for Medicaid.
They won't cover long-term care. We have to convert them to Medicaid, mass health, long-term care. There's no equivalent neighborhood health long-term coverage that I'm aware of. They've always made us do an entire new application for only long-term care.
Cliff?
True. Spoke about it, where we were penalized for not transferring, where we had so many patients that were on the state's Medicaid or Medicare, which one's different from the federal government, where we were being charged like $20 a day per person.
We do. It's not a penalty. It's a user fee.
Yeah.
We get
Sounds nice.
it's called a bed tax in old terms. They pay us, say, $208 a day, but we pay them $17.58 a day. So ultimately, even though they're paying us $220, you still have to back out that $17 that we're paying back to them. So we're really only getting $202 per day out of the mass health. We have in our budget for 16 $290,000 estimated for our user fee, as it's called, but we call it a bed tax.
Right.
And we have to pay that on every single bed we have, not just Medicaid beds and beds that are unfilled. So if we have 45 beds, we're paying a bed tax on 45 beds, even if we only have 38 of them filled.
Craig?
Hi, Rachel and Craig.
Hi.
So with the revalidation, that's done?
It's done, thank goodness.
Okay. And the question, because I don't know, how does it work with someone being covered by Medicaid or Medicare or private insurance? Wouldn't everyone want to be on Medicare? Why would someone come in on private insurance? They have too many assets? Or?
Well, private insurance is a little rough for the Island Home because we don't have contracts with any private insurance. I've fought Blue Cross Blue Shield on multiple occasions saying, here we are, a town-owned facility with employees that get Blue Cross Blue Shield, and if something happens to them, they have a hip replacement, something happens, they qualify, they come back here, Blue Cross Blue Shield won't pay for their stay at the Island Home because we don't have a contract with them. We can't get a contract with private insurance such as Tufts, Navigator, Blue Cross Blue Shield because we are not CARF or JACO certified. And we would have to probably, with the facility size and the workload that we have, we've looked into it a couple times, and I've had a consultant talk to us, and they've told us that you'd probably, in order to get that certification, you would have to probably hire another individual to manage that type of oversight, and the cost to buy into those is a lot. So to us, it was, where's the benefit here? Is it worth it or not? Some insurances, like Blue Cross Blue Shield and Mass, will pay the co-pays on Medicare stay. But what we experience with the long-term care is you have to have a 3-night acute qualifying stay, be 65 years or older to have Medicare A. And then you end up usually at the hospital, then you usually come to us. And Medicare will cover you as long as you're deemed qualified, and then you switch over to either Mass Health or private pay. So any private insurance, secondary insurance that we get is usually the co-pays off of therapies or Medicare A co-pays after day 20 of your stay.
Okay. Joe?
I'm not sure it's a question for you, Rachel, or for Martin and Brian. Just that the P&L, so to speak, that shows the subsidy from the general fund of the town talks about for fiscal 16 having a transfer from retained earnings of $1.5 million, and then at the bottom it says certified retained earnings as of July 1, were 1.7. So I have two questions. One, how does an organization basically runs at a $3 million deficit all the time have any retained earnings at all? And you have to answer that question. Does a $1.5 million subsidy in the fiscal 16 budget mean that you're basically wiping out retained earnings and you can't do that again other than $200,000?
Sure, I can answer that for you. The only reason why we have retained earnings is because we get this wonderful thing built into the state laws with Medicaid called certified public expenditure. And because it is unpredictable, if we get it year to year, it is not a reliable funding source. We haven't been able to build it into our actual revenue sources for budget. So, for instance, if you do look at the Island Home budget on the revenue breakdown, there is a line, which is the third one down, that says prior year CPE receipts. So we received it in 12, which was for calendar year 9 and 10, and then we received it, we didn't get it for fiscal 13, and then we received it in fiscal 14, which was for calendar year cost report filing 12. We have not, no, we did. We just received CPE again this year within 15. So what ends up happening is, because that is a unknown if we get it or not, we could put in the request. The state could look at it and say, nope, we don't have the funding, we're not giving it to you, and we don't end up getting what we file for. Because it is such an unpredictable whether we get it or not, it's not a guarantee. It's been discussed and not part of our anticipated revenue. If we had that, we probably wouldn't, if we built it into our budget, we would never probably have any retained earnings. The only reason why we've ever gained retained earnings was because of that CPE filing.
Okay, so the town basically transfers from the general fund, and you periodically, and whatever the cycle is from the state, get these, they've been 1.8, 1.0, you get these $1 million sort of contributions from the state.
Yeah, what it is, it says that you are a town government-owned facility that is providing public funds to care for through the Mass Health program to offset costs, like anything that you've lost from Mass Health. So it's clear if we run $430, $435 a day cost, we're only getting $200 from the state. Obviously, the town's public tax dollars is supplementing that loss to keep those individuals cared for.
Right.
They take that based on our cost report that we file at the end of each calendar year, based on a calendar year. They take that, they take all the numbers that are given to them, all the balance sheets, everything that we provide to them. They put it into this funky formula and say, okay, you spent $2.9 million of taxpayer funds. Based on this, you get $1,017,000 back. So because it's not received within the same year that it's paid, and it's always the year after, and everything, it just ends up going to retained earnings. We've been lucky in that respect. The way our retained earnings work is that it stays within the island home, so it is unfortunate that it doesn't just get transferred back to the general fund to offset what we're already receiving. But it has been helping fund our capital in the past. It hasn't been until more recent that we've needed to start using it to offset our operating rather than increasing the general fund subsidy, because if we were able to account for it, the subsidy wouldn't be increasing. So I think that's why we're trying to use it to offset. Because we've run a deficit, we were at 300,000, then 500,000. It's just everything's been building upon each other as salaries go up, regular operating costs goes up. Now we're looking at a deficit of 1.5 million. We had anticipated that $1.7 million in retained earnings would be used to fund our fiscal 16 capital. Well, now, since we have this deficit, rather than forcing other departments to cut funding when we know we have the retained earnings there, we're going to have to borrow for our capital projects and use our retained earnings to offset us. Our fear, which I think has been reiterated by some of the selectmen before, is what happens when we don't get that CPE money? What do we do then? And that's my fear, because it's just growing and growing and growing. And the second the state says, we're not giving you that money back anymore, I'm going to be looking at these guys saying, help. What do I do now?
Yeah.
There's only 2 facilities in the state that can apply for this funding right now, which is us and Taunton, and I think that's why they haven't cut it out, because in their overall budget, the money that they give back to us is such a small percentage, even though it's in the millions. It's such a small percentage to them that they haven't cut it out yet. So I think what usually happens is we get it so late because they anticipate if they have the ability to pay it or not. If they have a shortfall in their budget, we're not getting anything.
Yeah.
Just to make one other comment, one of the other reasons to not put it in is because when we're setting the tax rate, we have to be able to, with the enterprise fund, it has to be a predictable revenue source, and this is not frankly predictable, which if we put it in, then we may end up with issues getting the tax rate set as well. So there's a lot of justification not to put it in.
The state accepts the fact that it's not predictable. It's their funds, but they
you are to question whether the number was realistic or not, and because of the unpredictability in nature, it would be very hard to argue with them. So
it's their money. I mean,
They won't.
right, but that's
It's
the
a-
right hand versus the left hand.
Did I answer both of your questions?
Yes,
Okay.
actually, thank you.
Sounds good.
if you ever
All
have
right, actually, did you? Oh, Jim, go ahead. Then I'll ask.
So on the revenue exhibit, that's net revenue. It's less it's your gross revenue less your contractuals, which basically is the difference between what you charge and what you get paid.
Where are you?
So
This is 35
on
or
the-
3.5.
contractual obligations.
So,
Which one are you?
so the Medicaid patient revenue of $1.6 million for 2016, that's net revenue, which is net of your contractual allowance?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so these are all, and then if you added the numbers up from 1.6 to 2,800, would that equal
3.5.
3
The 3.5.
That should equal
3.594.
3.594. And that's where the transfer from retained earnings and the 1.540 would have to come in, and then we would still run a deficit of the 2.295, which is where the
Subsidy.
subsidy comes in.
All set, Jim? Let me ask a question. Capital. The electronic records, did I hear you correctly that the existing projects that you're applying for, you would transfer money from some of those to pay for the electronic records?
No,
Or
we
did I misunderstand
we
you?
had capital funds that were approved for the
Oh, previously.
renovation of the nursing station. We
Okay.
had I think it was $100,000. We didn't end up using all of that, so they
Okay. So
wanted
to go
to
from
know
that.
what we can do with it, and I said I need it to be reappropriated to our electronic medical records.
So this is a question, will that'll be in Article
It's-
14, whatever, to
Yeah.
transfer?
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. That's number one. And number two is, when you were here last year, you had spoken about the state, and again, if I'm quoting wrong, let me know, that the state had said 5 years on the facility or else, or else you would have to shut down. Is that correct?
Unofficially, yes.
Okay, so now we're 4 years left. And the only reason I know I've seen the capital budgets going out, just an update on, or what do you foresee as, I know the next step is the plan, but just a quick overview on where you foresee this going.
For a new facility or
Yes.
with the state?
Both? How about both? I really meant the new facility, but the state, I'd like to know that too.
We get a surprise inspection. It's supposed to be once a year, but they come anywhere between 9 and 15 months from the date of the last time they came. So the last time they came was in April.
Okay.
So our window literally today just opened, as we call it, the window, the 9 to 15 month
9 to
window.
15 month, okay.
And for some reason, we've all been thankful that the storm is coming because we were really expecting the way last year went that they would come as soon as possible.
Really?
So we might not get them in again until the spring, but we are all severely dreading them coming simply because there's only so long you can hold back people saying, we have a plan, we're going to capital, we're looking at this, before they say, you know what, we've been hearing this for 3 years now. So
Correct.
what are you doing? At least this year we had the mechanical engineer assessment last January. We have a few things, our biggest things that I've had to submit, thankfully, not yet this year. Our heating system has gone down, so the temperature in the building has dropped. So we have that as part of our capital, things like that. So the main things to at least keep the building functional, as long as they see that we have a long-term plan solidified. My worry is that if we don't start moving on either renovating severely our current facility or working on getting a new facility, they will be fine as long as we have a plan in place. But for me to continue to say we have a capital request in I don't think it's going to fly much longer.
And there is, I believe, and correct me if the numbers are wrong, is $1 million for
in
design.
FY16, there's
There is. So that would
money
be-
requested for design services.
So
for the
assuming that
facility.
goes through, that'll be enough to placate, for lack
Yes.
of a better term.
Yes.
Okay.
And basically what we're seeing with the building right now is there's quality of life issues that are just general. But what we're really seeing with the actual systems of the facility is that it can't handle the capacity that we're putting on it anymore. Our plumbing underneath is deteriorating, and the only way to get that up is to rip up the cement floor. I mean, it would be highly disruptive to the residents to try and replace any of that. Our heating system itself, it's amazing that we've actually lasted as long as we have on that. Our mechanical engineer, Marty Robertson, that came in and did it, was just blown away. He basically said that 90% of the systems that we have in that building have exceeded their life expectancy, and he's just saying, you know, I'm afraid that if you get in there and you start to update one thing, it's going to domino effect and everything's going to crash. It's kind of a good, well-balanced right now, and the second you start messing with something, it's just going to offset the harmony of it.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, to carry, I had another question, but this was one too. If you think about timing, we've got money in for plans. We've got the actual building in for 2017, which in my view is probably a year too early.
I think they might have pushed it out to 18.
The last
I think
thing
everybody
saw-
agreed 17 was a little
We were talking about
aggressive.
18, but I never saw it get changed.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll look at
But
that.
let's just say, I think you and I are on the same page. Let's just say it's going to happen, the earliest it's going to happen is probably 2018 to get it started.
If we're aggressive enough about it and
Yeah,
keeping
yeah.
on top of it, yes.
Yeah, if we really stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Which means that probably the earliest we could expect occupancy might be 2019,
I'm thinking more like
2020.
2021. Yeah.
The hospital guy next to me is yeah, I'm wrong.
Between the
All
fire
right.
station, the hospital, and all the
All right,
larger
let's-
projects that are out there in
Okay,
schools.
let's
I-
say 2020. I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm just, all right, the earliest we're going to get anybody in there is 2020. So the present facility has to last from now until 2000.
Which is why the bulk of what we have in for capital is to
Oh, yeah.
ensure that the building can carry
we went
through
through
the
that in
next
the
5
capital.
to
Yeah, the
whatever
capital,
years
all went
while
through
we're
this, but I
there.
just wanted people to understand that it's not like it's, that building has got to last another 5 years minimum,
Yeah,
and it's in tough shape.
yeah.
So and you're doing the things based on the engineering study that you had done, and you're getting those things done, and they're in the capital, but even then, there's some questions about it. So if anybody wonders why there's a sense of urgency around the getting moving on that, because that, even if we wanted to move faster, I don't think we could move any faster than what we just said,
Yeah.
if we
I
went
agree.
at a full sprint.
And
So-
I think you're going to get a lot of community input and things like that, especially family members of current past residents. I've already had a lot of inquiries about why on earth we would think of moving the location and what are you going to do with the current location. And I think that it's sometimes hard for people to understand that you can't exactly renovate a nursing home with people living in it.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere else that they can go on the island. You know, people have brought up, well, just have them go to Sherburne Commons. I'm sure you can work out that. It's just not. It's not as easy as just have them go hang out at Sherburne Commons for a couple of years. They would have to probably go to another facility off island, and it's just not feasible. What are you going to do? Pay people for not working?
I think we have heard those same concerns, and good luck, and my
And those
compliments
focus
for.
groups will be great.
Yes, they will, especially in the summer, I hear them
Yeah.
quite a bit. Greg?
As a follow-up, does the state, if these things aren't done, do they fine us, or they shut it down and tell them who everyone out? What's
They
the-
could, if they feel that the resident safety is as such that they can't safely live there anymore, they certainly could. What they would do is probably freeze admissions and require an emergency repair of specific things. They could then freeze payment until things are done. They are getting much more, forthcoming, I guess you could say, with violation penalties, things like that. They're doing a lot more fines than they used to in the past. The biggest thing that we would anticipate is that they would probably freeze our admissions and possibly freeze payment until they had sufficient evidence that we fixed the things that cause significant health concerns to them. They would understand, being an island, that you can't really send them to the facility next door. They would have to work with us on the relocation of those residents, but we would always have to do it within 30 days. So they could, if something bad enough happened, say, for instance, tonight during the middle of the storm, the entire heating system completely breaks down and there's no possibility of ever fixing that. You're not going to be able to keep those residents in there. They would have to come in here under an emergency situation and help us relocate those residents to facilities off island. I don't anticipate we would ever see that, but you can never predict anything. I truly would believe that they would probably just freeze our admissions until we fixed whatever problem would be there.
Yeah, very good. Jim?
So what do you think the risk of that is in terms of percentage, and have they done that in the last 12 months with any nursing homes in the Commonwealth? Or
I'm sure they have. I haven't heard about it, but I'm sure they have. There's a level of tags that we get, and we've never received a certain level. They call it a G tag. It's not alphabetical, so to speak, A to Z, but they have different levels, and it's kind of like a actual harm, potential for actual harm, and that we received that last year on a crazy incident, and we got fined $2,000, and that was the first time we've ever received a fine. So they've been implementing those fines more and more. Okay. Where we would get the building-related fines would be our life safety survey, which is still Department of Public Health. But if they came in and saw something and said, this isn't okay, we're going to tag you with a G tag or an F tag, which is not, well, an F tag is fine, but J. J is probably the worst tag you can get. They tag you with a J tag. That means that there is immediate harm to more than one resident. They could tag you with that, fine you. I mean, I just talked to one facility not too long ago. They fined them $10,000 per day until they fixed whatever problem they had. It was a resident care issue, but it's dependent upon the level of issues. So if our roof goes and half of our roof on one wing goes and residents were sent to the hospital with injuries, X, Y, Z, they could come in and immediately put an immediate jeopardy tag on us and fine us every day per day.
How did we pay for jeopardy? Okay, Joe?
I know there's been all sorts of studies over the years, and But I'm sort of curious in a general sense, and clearly, Rachel, you know the economics of this business. If the town does build a new facility, wherever it might build it, can our Ellen Home ever really run at a economic break even? I mean, I sort of know I have an assumption on the answer, but is it always going to be a service that the town offers and is going to have to subsidize? I mean, I'm just thinking a new building, multi-million dollars, labor
The less
contract. How
complicated
big
answer
a
is yes.
population can you ever service? I mean,
We would have to add a significant amount of additional beds, but we'd have to petition the state to be able to add more beds. And if we're
Like how
not
many?
running at full capacity, probably 102, I think is
Oh,
what
it's
was
going down.
determined in 270.
It was,
105, is it?
oh, it's 105. Oh, it's lower than it was.
We had, total.
we got double the size.
We had worked on that in the.
2.5.
Oh, good. No, because the number was 140.
The problem is
Less.
that we can't even fill our 45 on a steady basis without having a wait list. There's no way the state would determine that we would need 105 beds. So you would have a 105-bed facility that would never be
Utilized.
used.
Okay, I hear you. Thank you.
That's been a
You've answered the
discussion,
question.
that's been a discussion for over 10 years.
Okay.
Oh, Martin, you want to add before I go to John?
Great point, the building is pushed out to 2018.
You know, it's funny, I didn't see that on the long-term plan, though. But I'm glad, but it is, maybe I'm looking at the wrong stuff. It is good. And what's the number that's in there?
We have 15 million dollars.
15 million, okay. John?
Martin, could you send me email me a copy of that?
Email to all of us.
Yeah, because the latest plan I have does not have it in there, so I don't.
The capital committee, but I'll email it.
Okay, that's not the question.
I figured that.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
You said that, you did say that we, on the what do you call it, the CPE funds, you said you just received the 2015. How much was that? Do you remember offhand, roughly? Roughly, I don't know.
$1.6 million, 1.6 and change, yeah.
Okay, so, but that won't be shown up anywhere except
That
in
won't go
retained
anywhere until the
earnings.
end, until June 30th, when they start closing the year and they can submit for
Okay.
certification of retained
So
earnings.
as long as we remember it, we're okay.
Mhm.
But it won't, there's nowhere that we have it.
There's no way you can use it in any way, shape, or
anyway,
form until
in
maybe
Except
annual
retained
town
earnings,
meeting
except we see
appropriation
retained
next
earnings
year.
again.
That's right. Sounds like the airport. No,
I
but no,
understand.
it's a good point, because
No, I'm being facetious, but I'm not.
it's next year's budget, in essence.
It's
making
quite
the point
frustrating.
out.
There's, I mean,
Yep.
there's, ultimately, we would be looking at a possible deficit in this year's revenue for a couple particular reasons. Brian and I looked at it, did the analysis, but because of that CPE and, oh, good, we're good for 15, even though it wasn't built into the original budget, it counts as an actual. So we know that we're not in any jeopardy there for revenue for 15, but we're looking at it as being in jeopardy for 16. If we could add 1.5 million in there, knowing that we could get CPE money, we wouldn't be looking at utilizing
No, I
all our
understand.
retained earnings.
Yeah, you're doing what you can.
Yeah.
The question about the problems you're having now and why we have to literally understate our and the problem that, of course, gets you is that then getting it certified is going to be a problem until you roll through that.
Yeah.
Are you keeping track? Do you keep track in any way to say, all right, this is what we're getting,
Yep.
but this is what we should get?
Yes.
So you have a pretty good idea
Yep.
of the disparity.
Every week I get a breakdown from my business office coordinator about what our received revenue and our payroll, every single week what we spent in payroll, and I add that into my spreadsheet and divide out what was revenue received for 14, what was revenue received for 15, and what we're actually looking at, what our
Okay.
deficit would be, wouldn't be, things like that.
So you know,
I'm going to have to.
regardless of the budget, you know what that is.
I'm going to have to, because when we actually get into the fiscal 17 cycle, they'll implement revenue that would be much higher than we would ever be able to bring in. So I need to actually know what our actual revenue for 15 is so I can knock down our anticipated for 17. I would love to keep the additional revenue that Bill probably put in there for 17, but I can't, knowing that we won't make it.
Without
You're just setting yourself up for failure.
without pinning you down, and I know because that puts you in kind of a funny position, but looking at this revenue number that we're looking at, which is startling for 2016, you know, how much higher should that be in your mind, roughly? So just to give us a feel of it, you know what I'm saying?
I think I estimated about $200,000.
$200,000.
Yeah, I think it was $255,000 is what we were not able to bill for and recoup in fiscal 14. So between our Medicare A, which you can look at, we budgeted $240 in 15, and we only budgeted $150 in 16. I would anticipate that we could probably bring in close to $100,000 just on Medicare A. I mean, we're getting better with that, and I think it's completely conservative to say that we wouldn't bring in at least $200,000.
Okay.
And then you have the secondary insurance, you know, we could easily bring in $40,000 for that. So I think if you looked at it overall, and we kept a census up, and we didn't dip in census, and we didn't dip in private pay, I think you could conservatively say that it's about $200,000 off, but.
Okay.
Okay. Further questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good luck on keeping the numbers in order.
Good luck.
No, but for what it's worth, I've always now hear about how superior the care is given by the staff, and I do want to commend you. It must
Just what I think.
be
just what I
difficult in
think
those
I
physical.
figured out in Massachusetts.
Yes, we have had a lot
Circumstances.
more
I hear
donations, a
something
lot
like
more
this, and
people
I have
come in
all
from
new
prominent Nantucket families just because
lower
of family
than what it
members. I
was.
think it's hard when, if you don't actually have to be there and go through it, you don't really know what we do.
No, it is. So I think you should be commended on that. Anyway, thank you very much, Mr. Tom.
Can I ask a question of Rachel? Sorry, Jay.
Yes, go ahead.
It seems like over these years, over the past bunch of years, that number is usually around between like a 38 and a 44 or something like that. And I'm wondering if there's something just built into that community that maintains that number like that. Do you foresee a spike or a deduction in that? Or what controls that number that seems very consistent?
The reason it got this way is because
It's hard to
people
say. I think
would
by now
not-
we would have
they wanted
anticipated
to
a
deny,
wait list.
they wanted to say,
Again,
well,
things
we
like
gotta
that.
figure out
So
another
home
way
care is
to do
becoming much more popular and
Well,
much more
yeah,
accessible
now
in
we've
some
come to
ways,
be-
so people
I
are
think
staying
most people
home longer.
realize
There are
it's the
people who are
town's
in the
business.
hospital
Yeah.
that
We're
they
stuck
could
with
come
it.
to
That's
us,
right.
but they do have the option
let's
to go
get
to
out of
home.
this.
You know,
5
I
years
think
ago,
it's
we
just,
talked about
we anticipated with the individuals getting older and the population of those people getting older throughout the years. You know, David can certainly speak to this. We talked about this in the work group, but the funding from the state and federal is moving more towards home care reimbursement than long-term care reimbursement. So those type of services are gaining momentum, and people are staying home longer. And so even though we anticipated we might have a wait list by now, when I first started working at the Island Home 10 years ago, we had a wait list, and it slowly dwindled away. And I don't anticipate that we'll have one for a very long time unless we start dipping into the home care business, and then that's another avenue to go to. But it's still a whole different ballgame, so to speak.
Okay. Jim has a follow-up.
Just one last comment is to follow up on the chairman's comment. We're very blessed to have a very cooperative relationship between the hospital and our Island Home. It's from the hospital's perspective, it is a critical and valued asset. Where the patients and families that go from the hospital to the nursing home are very complimentary of the care, and we just, you know, the hospital certainly pledges to continue that relationship, and we're just very fortunate to have you.
Well, thank you.
Very good. Drive safe.
Thank you.
Tom?
Did I hear?
Tom?
That's the reason.
I could make a comment, but I won't. It's your department, so get going. No, thanks for coming. And again, I think, you know, for the airport, it used to be one of the, we always had a kind of flex our muscles and grit our teeth when we knew the airport was coming in. We don't have to do that anymore. So I think. Yeah, I know. I'm saying I'm trying to give a good job done. Maybe it's the wrong analogy, but thank you for coming. So,
In all honesty, I mean, you're looking at a budget that is a work in progress.
okay, and tell us what that.
I should have said, you know, in the upfront here where we have goals, I should have said one of the goals, unfortunately I did it out of sync, but one of the goals is to build a budget.
Okay.
Past practices and a number of other things have not allowed us to build a reliable budget.
Okay.
For example, some of the past practices, if a line item didn't have enough money in it, they would just go to another line item and take it out, so you didn't know, if you were taking uniforms out of trash cans or something, material supplies, whatever.
Okay.
So it didn't allow for any history to be built to say, this is what we need. So you're seeing a fairly decent increase in expense here, but it's because that is built on top of what we don't know is in there, if you will.
Okay.
So what we've also done is reclassify a number of things. There's a number of new line items, so if you go back and look at history, you're going to see zeros. Again, cleaning it up, we've developed internal procedures where Jamie has established, what is to be taken out of where, examples, and what happens when the account, runs dry, and so on and so forth. I will remind everybody that we are managing to actual, not yet to budget, until we can get a firm, reliable budget. So you'll see, in summary, essentially, we've got revenues of $7.8 million and expenses of $8.6, which requires us to rely about $800-some thousand on retained earnings. Last year, you may recall that we had 1.3 in retained earnings, and we actually used none. So we actually made a slight profit last year. So that's the good news. There was no subsidy in this year, and there's no subsidy projected in the 16 budget.
Good.
The reliance of retained earnings, as I said, is down from a budget perspective, and we're hoping to keep it to zero from an actual. And in fact, in this budget, there's $135,000 to begin the repayment to the town. Brian and I have worked out, I should say Brian has worked up a very good framework for the repayment.
I would agree. I think you guys did a very good job with that,
So-
considering the opposition that you
Well, and
feel.
we're just fine tuning it now. We'll get an agreement put together here. For those of you who aren't aware, that it's basically two pieces. It would be $230,000 a year, except for the first year is $135,000 because our budget cycle timing and everything. But that would be for 20 years, and then there'd be a second part, which would be 20% of retained earnings would go to the repayment to reduce the time frame. But the first 3 years of those retained earnings would be set aside until we ensure that the airport is on a stable footing. So I'll be glad to answer any questions I may. I would, when you look at some of these items and you see some larger increase in expenses, a number of it I would categorize as state of good repair. We have a number of automatic doors that need either replacing, upgrades, safety enhancements, whatever. Things like trash cans, although they're expensive, they don't meet the capital requirement. Turnout gear for some of our firefighters, things like that. We've furthered over the past couple of years. We're now trying to build some of that back in.
Well, one thing before you do, you mentioned Jamie before. I think it seems that since she's on board, it's making your life a lot easier, and has she helped? I think the committee might want to mention the committee.
James Miller is, I can't say enough about her, and I think Brian and Martin have had a lot of dealings with her too. She has an audit background, comes from that side of the field, and everything must match to the penny. She's allowed herself to go off 3 cents, 4 cents here and there. She's very, very good. Had a little bit of a misfortune today. We actually had some hackers get into our computer system. And apparently what they do now is they encrypt a number of your files, and then they hold them for ransom. And if you want to pay the ransom in Bitcoin, you can get your files unencrypted.
In Bitcoin?
Yeah.
So Jamie has been working on some reconciliation going way back
We're hoping we can recover some of these files. But anyway, Jamie has done a tremendous job of improving processes. She has a background not only in accounting, but in IT as well. She has a degree in IT. So she has worked to create new spreadsheets, forms for the airlines to fill out, automated things, cleaning up processes. And what she's working on now is the budget. She unfortunately could not go through every line item and say, okay, here's what was purchased, because there's thousands and thousands of things. So we took our best guess, if you will. Okay, this is what's already in there. These are the new requests. We'll put this in, and we'll just monitor to make sure that, if it was already in there from previous years, and will come out, obviously, have the actuals.
Yeah, very good. And then one more little thing is going back to the repayment, as members of the committee might remember 3 years ago, it was at town meeting, it was quite a controversial item that, for a subsidy. And I think that the way things have worked out is that it was certainly taxpayer money well invested. So anyway.
One other item on the revenue. You may recall this is the first year of the passenger facility charge.
Okay.
It was not in last year's budget, but we're actually collecting it, so you're going to see an anomaly in this coming year for retained earnings. We have adjusted in the 16 budget the passenger facility charge to reflect more of what's actually happening. So it was projected at 700,000. It's down to about 647 now. We had 600. We were anticipating 600 this year. Looks like it's going to be about 647.
Okay. All right, with that, we're ready for questions. Jim and then John.
This is a question for Brian and Martin.
Okay.
In the past, years ago, there was really two separate financial audit functions between the airport and the town, and the finance committees tried to facilitate better communication and oversight. And I'm not trying to ask you to, certify the financial statements, but are you comfortable with the accuracy of the information and the the airport enterprise fund, and also with your ability to provide oversight to that?
I only have about 7 months.
I understand.
So, you're probably going to get a very glowing report from me, because I'm very satisfied.
Good.
In consultation with our auditors during the fiscal 14 audit, I know that it was an area that, from the management letter in prior years, there was difficulty reconciling receivables and whatnot. And having a small debrief with the auditors during the audit process, I know that they were extremely pleased with everything that's gone on at the airport, and we had no issues with the receivable reconciliations between us and them in terms of details or anything like that. So I think that there's been a lot of positive steps, and I'm very comfortable with where it's at. Jamie's done a tremendous job, and certainly on our side, Martin and Bob have spent a lot of time working with her, and Tom and I have been spending a lot of time going through this, trying to get an understanding so that we can make sure going forward things are correct. And if we encounter a bump, we have the requisite ability to deal with it collaboratively to get it done, instead of sitting there saying, well, I didn't know you or me. So I think the collaboration and the ability to work together is gone. Like I said, it's only 7 months here, so I can't speak to everything that's happened. But from my perspective,
that's an advantage that you're new, because actually you can see it from a more
objective. I think that it's really good, and I don't want to put words in Tom's mouth, but I hope he would agree.
I was going to say,
Thank you.
The communication is, I've been here just over almost 3 years. The communication is dramatically improved, and if we don't know something, we don't know it. We go to these guys; that's their business. And we've worked on the systems and things a lot closer to it. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
John?
I've got a bunch of questions, but I want to start out with you mentioned earlier the passenger facility charge, which shows up as in this year's budget at $647,000.
In 16's budget, in this budget.
That's what I meant.
Yes.
New budget.
Yes.
what is this? In other words, I don't understand. Maybe I didn't.
It's essentially a head tax, $4.50 that is assessed for every passenger that boards an airplane at the airport here.
This is new?
The airline, yes.
This-
And
Go ahead.
it was, the airline keeps 11 cents of that $4.50. The rest comes to the airport, and it's dedicated for capital projects. We had to go through a federal process to file an application, identify projects. It's mainly, the main project that we were using it for was for the debt service on the terminal. Since the town and the airport have already put up the money, they can reimburse themselves for that, and that's what we're doing with it. You may remember that we put the application in, we were supposed to hear from FAA before last town meeting. We didn't hear until the last minute, so we couldn't put it in last budget. We had to back it out. Now it's
Okay, yeah, it's coming back now. It showed up.
Okay. What's that? David?
Fuel sales. Units going up, down,
Well, I'm
sold?
glad you brought that up because I forgot to address the revolver, and I apologize. The
Well,
gallons,
do just address.
the gallons are about
I
flat.
don't have it at mine.
Obviously, the price is down.
I didn't see it. Okay,
And
over in that packet.
We're working with Brian on adjusting the cap.
Debt.
The cap for the 16 was supposed to be about 5.5, so it went up about 200,000.
Am I wrong?
Our concern is that with the price of fuel low and the cap going up, there's going to be a large amount of money in that revolver that doesn't get over to immediate or in a shorter time period over to the operating. So we may look at bringing it down from 5.3 is where it is today.
And refresh me on what we have. Do we have to have a town meeting vote to change the levels?
Annually, it has to be reauthorized.
Right.
Okay.
So it's an article this year.
Reauthorized at whatever level.
Right.
Town meeting to lower it,
Lower.
but you and the Board of Selectmen to increase it.
Well, town meeting could increase it. at the
Or,
meeting.
yes, but that's the warrant article, where it's written.
And do you maintain your margins on declining cost of goods sold, or are you,
Yes, it's a straight margin, it's not a
Okay. So-
percentage margin, it's flat.
so your margin should be going up? Your dollars per gallon sold should be going up, is what you just said.
No, it's not a percentage, it's a flat $1.40 above what
Okay,
we're
that's,
buying it.
so that's your.
So you have,
That makes sense.
all right.
And what we do is we benchmark against other airports to make sure we're in line. We just got a call the other day from our fuel provider. Phillips is jacking up the price 2.5 cents per gallon. And when I asked why, they said Phillips is just passing it on to everybody. I said, yeah, they're taking advantage of low price of fuel, that's what they're doing.
Right.
So, unfortunately, we can't.
Okay.
Cliff? Are you all set? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, Cliff?
When you talk about the accounting methods now, so we've eliminated the, where the airport had its own auditor before. We've gotten rid of that.
Oh, yeah,
We don't do that
We're
anymore.
not using, and it wasn't an auditor, he was helping prepare.
Prepare the statement.
Yeah.
And again, another thing that Jamie, I give her kudos, we have a requirement to fill out an FAA form each year. That's what Peter Land essentially was helping us to do primarily.
Mhm.
Jamie picked that up and did it herself. Well, I shouldn't say did it herself. A lot of help from these guys too this year.
So when we reflect the fuel now, obviously we have this revolver where it went from, it used to show $7 million and now it shows like $1.2 million. Is that just the, how does that?
Because of the creation of the revolver. Before it was all dumped into the operating.
Okay.
Gotta
All right.
add that.
So as we trend from, obviously the debt's going down, we've done a lot of big projects. So we cut like $300,000 from salaries, administrative salaries. Do you feel, even though general aviations seem to slow in the winter, it seems like JetBlue and the rest of them have picked up maybe the slack? Do we feel like we're coming out of the woods? Are we trending in the right direction, do you believe?
Yes and no.
Okay.
We're trending downward slightly, but it's not impacting us negatively. I have started the process of developing an air service development program, and I have meetings with a number of airlines at the end of this, actually next week. Two primary goals. One is to improve connectivity to the national system in the off months, and the other is to get the other seasonal airlines to expand their shoulder season, like JetBlue has done, because they've they've done that, and they've done very well. So.
Go ahead. Yeah.
When I worked for United Airlines, and you used to purchase routes, you flew the route whether there was a person or there was 10 people waiting to get on the plane. I've never gotten into that as far as small airports. We don't require that, or the FAA doesn't require them to fly a certain schedule like Island Air or Cape Air.
No, and that used to be the CAB that would require that.
Okay.
You have to get approval to fly a route, and you're supposed to fly it if you get the approval. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Now, a unique thing in this market is, you know, if Island or Cape Air post 5 flights a day, they may run 10 or 15. They have to run those 5 technically, unless the mechanical weather or whatever.
Okay. So they just require them to have some sort of schedule, not necessarily. Okay.
No, it's a route.
Okay.
It's approved.
Oh, okay. Versus us. All right.
Versus the schedule. Yeah.
Okay.
All set. Christie.
From fuel sales, we know people have options as far as getting it elsewhere, but do you have any flexibility to raise revenue in landing fees?
Yes, we are. As a matter of fact, what is not in this budget, there's 2 items of revenue that we're looking at that we did not put in here to be conservative. We're going through an overall review of our rates and charges to include landing fees, ramp fees, parking fees, everything. We've had some internal meetings. We're at this stage now at the master plan where we're going to be working with a consultant to look at the rates and charges. So we are looking to increase those. And the other is we're looking to diversify some of our income. We have some land that we want to put out a request for proposal on. We have some land on Sun Island Road. It's about 5 acres. And working with Plus for town meeting, possibly do some zoning changes for some other ones.
Okay. Did you have a question, Joe?
Yeah,
Oh,
pass
sorry, they
section.
did. Okay. John, then David?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand you when you first started, but I think I do now. But I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I want to tell you how I'm interpreting this budget. If you look at it if you look at 216 relative to 215 budget, your expenses jump all over the place. But if you look at it in relationship to 214 actual, it looks like that's what you've really tried to make your budget out of the 214 actual, using that as historical. Is that what you meant when you started?
To some point, yes. For most of those line items, that's correct. But then there's a lot of reclassification going on. So.
I understand that. I'm just saying in general, that
Yes.
this is what you meant when you first started saying we're
Correct.
having to relate it to actual, because
That's what we know to be fact.
that's what you know, and you can't. So, okay, so we shouldn't really even though the form compares everything to 2015 budget, it really is, that's not a real, you're.
And I will caution you on the 14, as I said, because we have added line items, we've
Okay.
moved things into their proper places and that kind of thing.
But your in total, what you're saying, if you look at the bottom line, your expenses should be comparable bottom line. It's just how you've classified them is.
Yes.
You've moved them around a little bit, yeah, okay.
Okay. David, then Jim.
Tom, you've got a ratio between private takeoffs to scheduled takeoffs?
You said we run a ratio.
Do you know what the ratio
We
is?
Yeah, we can get that.
Do you just
No,
50-50, 40-60?
I wouldn't even want to venture a guess. I could have it for you tomorrow morning.
Well, where I'm going is actually, it strikes me that our airport is increasingly a private airport, and that the growth in the traffic, I suspect, is consistently in the private side. And the question I have, notwithstanding, I'm sure you're going to tell me there are all these FAA rules and stuff like
I know
that,
where you're going, and I'll tell you what we've done with it.
is that are the users paying in proportion to their impact on the airport, the number of takeoffs and landings, et cetera, et cetera. And again, just maybe more from a strategic plan for the airport, should we be thinking more about enhancing the private side of the business?
We're focusing on that, but I can tell you right now that in rough numbers, 70% of the revenue comes from the corporate GA side of the house, and 60% of the expense or more comes from the commercial side. So
your
they are
business
being,
person's add-on, you would.
but that doesn't mean the elasticity isn't, the elasticity is over in the corporate. We have a little more room, a little. What we have done is, and we're not taking this to its full fruition now, but we're looking at implementing some portion of it. Something very innovative, if you will, and different from most airports on that corporate side, and that is looking at creating a fee structure that is based on size as opposed to weight. Because again, the theory being that real estate is critical, and that's what we're in short supply of. And they have these bigger airplanes now taking up more real estate, and we're running out of it. So we're doing a cross-check to make sure that, it's not penalizing the smaller guy and the other guy at the top's getting away with it. So we're looking at balancing that out within its own area.
It would strike me though, I would think, I have a hard time believing that we would destroy demand by raising prices on the private side.
No, that's
so.
Our goal is to protect the service that is provided to the year-round residents of Nantucket, meaning scheduled service over there. That if one has to support the other, we want service. So.
But right now, 60% of our expenses coming out of
from the commercial side. Scheduled service.
And the bulk of our revenue. So they're costing us money without, there's a
Yes,
cross-subsidization, right?
Yes, and we have to split down now the commercial scheduled service too. So when I look at that, I look at, there's the year-round providers and the ones that, don't mean this negatively, but cherry pick and come in and take, So there may be some room for flexibility in there too.
And on the weight to size ratio, NetJets flies in here, they drop, they take off.
And they pay a ramp fee every time they come in, the landing fee.
Right, but if you did it on size versus weight, or would you just have a formula that included weight and size?
It may include both. It would certainly have, we're not going to penalize ourselves, we're going to make sure it's at least better than the weight, but it's distributed more equitably.
Thanks.
Jim?
This may not be so much related to fees, but I remember you saying in the past that you've got to be careful on your pricing structure for fuel because people were going and fueling up over in Hyannis rather than here. And there was also an issue of the cost of hotels where people were having their flight crews stay on the Cape when they're refueling. So that's
what we've found. We found that they will drop here, go over to Hyannis, fuel up, do whatever, stay a couple days and come back. And primarily it's because of two things: the price of hotel rooms and availability.
Yeah. But also fuel costs too, right? Or once your fuel.
Our fuel's competitive. We benchmark it on a monthly.
But you have to be
weekly
competitive
basis.
because of that. Yeah.
Okay. Christy, then John, then Cliff.
Just a comment and a question. The comment is, I think the sooner we get something in for the private, the better, because I have a theory that it's just going to, I think that's going to increase. That traffic.
We're hoping to have that in for this season.
The question is there an equivalent for the PFC for general aviation than there is for commercial?
No.
Okay. John, then Cliff.
Yeah, this is more of a macro question. I was just looking at the enterprise fund as a business. I noticed that your projected debt is going to go down about $1.2 million a year, but your capital for the next few years is going to go up on an average of about 3.8, which means you're going to build debt, in my view, which is going to increase your debt service. So that's a cost that's, in my view, probably going to go up.
Yes, but
Okay. Probably my guess is about 130 a year, could be 130,000 a year. The other thing that is probably more concerning to me is that the expenses, if you look at total expenses, and that's why I asked you the question about total expenses, if you look at the last several years, it's been going up and up and up.
In budget.
Well, if you look at if you look at the 2016 budget relative to the 2014 actual, okay, it's gone up significantly. Okay.
Right.
Now, that comes out to around 5% a year and change, okay? So, I don't know, I guess this is something that you probably have already looked at, and the question is, if that's a trend, and it continues to go up, your expenses continue to go up that much a year, then you turn around and look at the revenue and say, all right, where are we going to get the revenue to compensate for that? And to me, that's troublesome.
I think there's two things there, John. One, that trend is not as you described it, because as I said, the budget is strictly a budget. It's a tool, and it's only as good as what you put into it. You can get a $2 tool down at the corner store, you can get, a $20 tool. I'm working with a $1.50 tool right now.
Okay.
So, and I don't take that lightly at all. It's only as good as what we can get into it. That's why I say we're keeping a very close eye on these actuals, and you'll see when we present our second quarterly report, we're doing much better than last year, too, on both revenue and expense. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and that concerned me. And that's where I start immediately thinking, okay, I need to diversify revenue, and I got to have additional income. So it's not as great as you would, the way you described it, because of that factor. But there are increases, and that's what I'm looking at, diversification for the additional land and rates and charges increase to make it sustainable.
Okay. Cliff? Oh, I'm sorry, you want to say something? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I know that you talked about capital, but a lot of that capital too, Tom, you can chime in on it too, is offset by a grant. So
Right.
the net increase is
I was wondering about that.
$3.8 million
So
we're based on that, it's about $700,000 versus $3.8 million.
Spending less of
Oh, great, you have that quantitated out?
That's quite frankly less of a concern to me than the expenses anyway, because that was
I
fairly
know
minor
where
part
you're
of it.
coming from. I looked at the same thing, and I was, it was going like this, and I said, we got a problem.
Yeah. Well, you got, because granted, to increase your revenue, you're going to have, is difficult, I think, is it?
We have some room, but not tremendous.
Yeah.
Controlling the expense is going to be critical. And that's why I say, if you look at these budget numbers, yes, there's a big jump there. I don't expect,
Okay. You're going to beat that?
I don't expect to hit anywhere close to this expense in the budget, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for providing that, Brian, that helps out. Cliff?
Just to clarify, a Cessna 150 lands and pays a landing fee, and a G5 lands, they pay two different landing fees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Better, I was going to say.
Well, I just thought we were talking about adjusting the landing fees. I thought we already had a weight range and everything else.
But if, I don't know for a fact, but for example, 150 pays $10. If the G5 weighs 10 times as much, are they paying $100 or $75? And we want it for 150, because again, they're not only putting more, maintenance on the runway and taxiway system, but when you sit there, they take up space that I can't get other airplanes in.
Correct.
So, it has to be, all those things have to be taken into consideration.
Follow? Go ahead.
Yeah, different question. It's
different.
same airport. But anyway,
Maybe.
the Bunker Road property, when you talked about different zoning, and I didn't know if you had to change zoning other than for fuel tanks or something, but there's such a demand for, and we have some out there, like small landscaping companies that don't want to rent 2 acres of land. Maybe they want to rent a quarter acre or half an acre. It just seems like we could get more bang for our buck, and also to try and come up with a nice, a fee where it's not too excessive, where people can't afford it, or, I don't know if that's up in the air for.
We're required to charge no less than market value.
Okay.
Bunker Road has some challenges right now, as you may remember, the formerly used defense site. The Army Corps is coming in this week to identify specifically what items need to be moved. There's a lot of legal issues going on with that. We're going to have to relocate 2 tenants. We're going to take a little bit of a hit on the revenue side and expense, but not significantly. But we have a place to move them. We're going to do most of that in-house. And unfortunately, though, that land is going to lie fallow until Young and Cora can do their business. And that's just a small piece of it. We have to do some work on our MCD because there were some environmental issues that were not, the loops weren't closed before. So we're working on that on the Bunker Road side, but as I said, we have 5 acres on Sun Island that is commercial industrial. And working with Plus on language how to put an RFP together for that.
Okay. What's that? Another one?
I have another question.
Okay.
The overall plan used to be that everything was going to go, when we talk about private aircraft, a long time ago, over the other side of the field. And obviously, now we've put fire stations where they maybe shouldn't have gone. But where do we go with that plan now? Where are we directing things? Is that totally scratched?
In for a penny, in for a pound. We're kind of committed.
Yeah.
Since, like you said, they put certain things in place, it's kind of like putting some anchors in there. We're just going to make the best of what we can with it. In the master plan, it does show an extension of the south apron, but they split it up into 4 different pieces so that we could afford it, essentially, and do it as we really need it. The main focus of our capital program over the next 5 years is going to be primarily ramp rehabilitation, because the ramp is in terrible condition for the commercial airlines, the air carriers, everybody. And that's high eligible item for FAA.
John?
Yeah, Tom, and this is maybe a question for Martin and company. Was there I know last year you did a 6-month actual for the Board of Selectmen, I think. You presented to them your first 6 months of the year in actual.
We do quarterly reports.
Okay.
We were supposed to do it at the last board, but it got so busy. It's now in February.
So there is
Fourth.
you have 6 months results right now.
Yes.
You do.
I think they're pretty favorable.
Okay. I'm wondering if we could see a copy of those.
I have
Yeah, that's a good idea. My one question is for you, Brian, before the board sees it. Are we privy to this?
Yeah. We haven't sent them to the board or anything yet.
Okay.
It would be
How-
more
so-
appropriate to send them to you guys.
After, once the board reviews it, then
When are they,
we'll
when are they
get,
going
and
to?
sometime in
February 4th.
Oh, February 4th?
That's what he just
Oh,
said.
February 4th, okay.
And they'll be in the package on the Board of Selectmen, so you
So as soon as
can
we
use the
send,
package.
as soon as we send it with the packet, we'll send it to you.
Thank you. I think that's a good question. We just don't want to be premature.
Well, we can't look at.
Don't say much, just say it's
I can
good.
summarize.
And then we'll find
Revenue was
out,
up.
Tom, we wanted to see that so we can find out what you mean by the difference between the budget and the
The
actual.
actual, and that's what I say.
Yeah.
You saw this.
Yeah.
The actual's pretty good.
So,
Revenue and expense are favorable in
this February 4th.
both cases.
Yeah.
For the actual.
Revenue
A week
is
from one half.
significantly. Expense, I believe, is up just.
It sounds like they tried to do it at the last board meeting and then ran out of time, so they pushed it to the next meeting.
Okay. Further questions? Frank?
Little off topic, I suppose. Is there anything happening with the solar energy project that was proposed? Is there anything going on
Anything
there?
happen? Yes, there's things happening. As part of our carbon neutral program, we have a solar element. And it is about 60, the carbon neutral program is about 65% reliant on solar. When we took the plan to natural heritage, I guess it is, they indicated that we would have to mitigate where the solar was going, and it could be up to 3-to-1 ratio. That would significantly increase the cost for the solar, both in terms of land, the management, everything else. That skews and really throws off the calculation, doesn't really make it that viable in terms of an overall program. We are working closely with the state. They understand it, and the way I described it to them is we're an airport first. We have, airport operational needs. We have to be good environmental stewards, but when one environmental requirement overweighs another one and throws the whole thing out of balance, it really, skews our main mission. The state is working to see if they can do something about the mitigation issue, because we're not alone in it either. So it is, you'll see in the warrant, there is a placeholder for the carbon neutral.
That's correct.
We were going to pull it out, but town council suggested that we leave it in as a placeholder, so you never know, things change, whatever. When we got into the carbon neutral project, it was always our intent that a third party would be doing the financing in ESCO. And now they're, the placeholder, I believe, has it for tax exempt bonding, which would require the town to do it. I said, there's no interest here for that. So they are the two main issues that are right now on the table for the carbon neutral. It's the financing and the mitigation for that.
And just a follow-up, if we're back, about that specific warrant article. So it's a placeholder right now. I'm just trying to foresee if more information doesn't come to light, we would make a recommendation to take no action. Unless there's something changes on your
Unless
front.
you have another one that says, no way.
Not to adopt. So that's kind of a pointed question that way.
No,
because it sounds like there really isn't, and we've talked about this before, but it sounds like there really isn't much on that front to proceed.
We were proceeding on a schedule that would have required us to have town meeting action of some sort.
Right.
That is now postponed. It's put off to the side because of this mitigation issue.
Okay.
So we're in a holding pattern.
Okay. And Craig, I don't know if you were done. I'm sorry. I'm going to get that out. You're done.
I do have another question.
Okay, go ahead.
Also on the warrant, there is a citizens article with beach access along the airport fence. Is there any issues with that as far as the airport's concerned?
Yes. Well, it depends. There's two of them there. There's two citizen warrant articles for beach access down in the area of what we call the former Divine property. I believe it can be done without relocating the fence, if I read the warrant article correctly. We have no real issues with that. Moving the fence is where we have an issue. Everything inside the fence and some outside the fence actually is considered FAA obligated land, and we would have to get their permission. And it could create an issue that we really don't. How should I say this? There's existing conditions that are grandfathered in that if we were to move that fence would no longer be grandfathered. It could have a very detrimental impact on some other uses down in that area.
Okay. We will be, Mr. Vorse will be coming in on February 10th to discuss zoning and real estate, and that will be coming up.
I'm not sure what that means, but
The other article, though, just to follow up again on Mr. Barretta's article, that's the other, and that's the other one. Is that,
He
or is
has
that?
two in there. Tom Barata has
He's two. I'm thinking of the other one, though. And, see, I can't think of it.
Hospital, I think.
No, the one is, no, one, is that the one? The
Two
airport?
beach
I'm
access
sorry. I'm
ones.
all-
And it's just going in different directions, I guess.
Okay, maybe that's what it is.
Actually, I think there's three. Aren't there two by the airport, and there's one over in Monomoy?
Monomoy Catholic.
And then there's the hospital one.
That's for him, yes. Anyway, okay, I'm getting interrupted again. Is that it? All set?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Chrissy, then Cliff.
So, as far as parking is concerned,
Vehicle.
vehicle parking. Cars are still not allowed to park in the front section. Is that a federal thing?
No, it's just a time thing. We have done a review on that. We're looking at changing our entire structure for parking. And again, focusing on, the year-round resident needs and people who need to use the airport as much as possible. That's just it's kind of like a short-term, long-term type of thing.
Yeah.
It's a policing thing for us to be able to just provide the short-term for people who come into the restaurant and, just an hour or two.
Yeah, as far as overnight, I've had a few clients get a ticket there for about $50. Does the airport get that? Where does that go?
Honestly, I don't know. But I know that, under certain circumstances, it's kind of like the appeal process. Our security person will review that. I don't know where the money goes. I don't see it coming in us.
It's a legit ticket, it looks like.
Yeah.
It's a,
Who issues the ticket? Police?
Our operations.
No, it's the
Yeah.
operation.
police can issue them too, but we do it over the overnight.
I just would think it would stay with you if you
It's
do it.
it's a town of Nantucket ticket. It does, it goes to Plymouth.
Yeah, it doesn't run.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
It goes to Pittsburgh.
It does.
We gotta talk here.
I never knew that. So the town of Nantucket ticket, yeah.
So is there, well, I guess if you're reviewing, but part of me thinks you could probably increase a little bit of revenue by maybe having a different overnight charge for the front lot and the back lot.
Well, and overall, yeah.
No, I don't know, but,
There's,
you know,
we're looking to mirror a little bit more like Hyannis does it. And they have hourly rates, but, the first 2 hours may be free.
yeah.
And then it's something, and then personally, I think $20 overnight is pretty steep.
Yeah.
We're competing with the boats, so we want to try to attract them.
Right.
Along with our commercial vehicles too.
All right, Cliff?
I just had a quick
Then Jim.
question about, you talked about mitigation for the solar array. They just did that massive solar project in Hyannis. I can't imagine they had enough land to mitigate for all that. How did they get away with it?
They didn't have as significant of issues as we did.
For the...
Apparently for the environmental, the species and things they didn't have to mitigate.
Okay.
Jim? And then John?
Just a comment. I'm sorry to talk so much about the parking, but so I'm assuming that you have responsibility for maintaining things like the gates.
Yes, we do.
Okay, but you don't get the revenue?
No, we do for parking.
For parking, you do get the revenue?
Yes.
Okay, so I just know that lately there've been a fair amount of
Lately? I'm sorry.
repairs issues. People get, people who come in late, either because of weather, they're coming back on the boat and they go to the airport and the gates don't work, and then if they do use their credit card, the receipt doesn't come out, and so.
The receipts.
It's only this.
This system,
And people get reimbursed from their
we've
employer
been
about that.
undertaking.
My wife asked me to ask these questions.
It's my nemesis. That system cost, I believe, in the neighborhood of $325,000 to $350,000.
Oh, my God.
That was like 270.
And quite frankly, I would not recommend that type of system. We've had the individuals from Scheiten Bachmann, who's the manufacturer, in for training, in for troubleshooting. We've been trying to get pricing from them. I have pricing from another manufacturer to replace all of the hardware.
Oh, my God.
I have a proposal from a company to come in and operate the entire parking thing. We're looking at it on all fronts, and we're not getting cooperation from the existing manufacturer. But to replace it is still a decent chunk of capital. Perfect example of one of our challenges. We have these tokens. Well, what happens if you lose the token? Typically, okay, you
go in, because I've done it many times.
We'll
You have to go
have
in.
an overnight inventory, though,
Right.
and we can say, okay, you've been here for so long, this is what you owe. But the bottom line is that token is still worth about $10, whereas a paper ticket, it's no big deal. If you had a paper ticket, you're not losing that much. So we get hit on both sides. As I said, we are evaluating all of it. My last piece of the puzzle is trying to get a cost from the manufacturer, because how should I say this? They're requiring us to have a maintenance agreement at the cost of about $35,000 a year, even if we don't use it. Which I said, if I pay $35,000, I'm going to be using a lot of it. But we want to ensure, does that mean we get software upgrades? Because one of our challenges is the software is old. As I said, they came out and evaluated. The gentleman's name was Wolfgang. We said, okay, tell us what we need. What upgrades we need. What new readers we need. They have not gotten back to us. This has now been 3 or 4 months.
I was going to say, how old is what, 3 or 4 years old? John?
Yeah, this is a comment.
I apologize, Jim, if that didn't hit.
No, I'll relay that.
We're having our own challenges with it. I appreciate everybody's
We're going to
patience.
live with Al for a long time. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Point, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have any more questions simply because until I see that first 6 months actuals, then I may have several questions, but I don't know that until I see it. So I don't know whether we may be, whether it's possible to have Tom come back at some time if we need him or not.
We'll determine that at the time.
Anytime you want.
Okay.
That's fine.
Because I think that first 6 months actuals are going to tell us a lot.
Further questions? Master plan, oh, go
I
ahead.
have a comment.
Oh, can I ask a question then? Oh, you go ahead.
Please,
Give your
no,
comment.
no.
I was going to ask about the master plan, that's all.
We're in the final phases. As I said, we've identified the projects for the financial consultant to look at financial feasibility. She's going to look at our operating revenue streams and costs and rates and charges, and then determine, okay, here's how much you can afford each year, and these are the projects, although these are the priority projects in these years, financially, this is what you can afford in these years. So to put the sync together for the schedules, if you will.
Okay.
The other piece is we have a draft, what's called airport layout plan. You may recall there's two elements that get approved by the FAA in a master plan. It's the forecast and the airport layout plan. The forecast has been approved. The airport layout plan is a big map, but it lays out everything that you're going to do. And a project must be on there in order for you to get federal funds, or actually build it even without federal funds. So it's the long-range plan for the airport. That is, again, the first draft has been out there. Our commission will be reviewing it over the next month or so, and then it will be sent to FAA for approval, so about 2 to 3 months out, probably, from completion of that.
David?
So I joined the committee a couple of years ago, and you were here, Dan Drake and Art Glassborough with your board. And every subsequent meeting, Dan would show up or Art would show up, and I'm absolutely delighted that you're here solely on your own, which to me represents the enormous progress that you and your team have made.
It's pure
And,
fun.
well, maybe it's pure luck. Take the credit for it.
Okay.
The airport's come a long way in the past few years, and I think, at least from my perspective, I see it continuing on and stable.
Thank you.
So good job.
What?
Should have been here 5 years ago.
No, that's good, sorry. Any other questions or comments? Just one last question for me, back to capital on the runways. Would you say the big percentage of your capital going out in the next 5 years is the runway renovations? Ramps. Ramp. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
The ramp, higher than just 40 years.
Wow. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So we will be getting the 6-month forecast, but I guess on that carbon neutral and on the real estate, I think we probably will be talking about that stuff again.
There are some other issues on real estate. Various issues.
Okay. Well, we'll need to talk about that. All right. We'll need to see you back, David.
I thought one of the items of discussion for the offset was the FAA.
That's still on the table, but I don't know if there's been any movement there.
The thematic line, you mean?
Yeah, so that would be the mitigating, the purchase of that would be the mitigation for the airport.
For the airport, but I think,
I know it's not on our current town
yeah.
meeting agenda.
We approached the land bank. They would be willing to work with us, but they have a lot of challenges and issues that they just can't. And the ratio would be probably higher before.
It would.
So, as much as they want to help us, there's just nothing they can do for us. I don't think they're still they have agreed in principle to the concept, but look into it. That other land that was talked about from not just airport, but an island-wide mitigation technique.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. We appreciate it. Good luck with keeping things running the next couple of days. Discussion of the next item, discussion of the Finance Subcommittee. I have not heard back from the Board of Selectmen, so we are where we are. I just will say that, well, we are where we are, so nobody wants to make any comments on it. Steve?
At the last meeting, you said that the Board of Selectmen might be looking for some feedback, some final product from the subcommittee by this town meeting?
That was what was mentioned at the meeting. That was one of the things.
Okay.
That was mentioned. I think we'll leave it at that.
But we don't have our charge yet.
We don't have a charge.
Okay.
Now, I will go to say, that back in the original, is that I am more than comfortable, for my part, to, if we want to start a subcommittee and constitute it, to get things rolling along without waiting on the selectmen. But and they'll give us a charge, but we can certainly roll along if we feel so inclined. But, Jim.
To me, just, I would like to, if I'm considering being a participant, I'd
Yes.
like to know what the charge is.
Okay. And then we'll wait.
But
That's
others,
fine.
you know,
I'm just throwing it out. We could,
Well, the first meeting's an organizational meeting, John.
when the charge comes in, I will get it right out. But that's why I have it on the agenda, so that we have, it'll be on the agenda for the next few meetings, just so that we will have the opportunity to talk about it.
But, Mr. Chairman, in your course of your conversations with the selectmen, it strikes me that they've certainly given some parameters around which they would like, maybe not a specific charge, but
Yes.
if this is something that they would like seen, particularly if it's around pensions
Yes.
by town meeting,
Yes.
I would suspect we would jam ourselves by
I think that,
waiting.
we could. I agree with that. That's why I think we certainly don't want to rush to judgment or rush to give a recommendation that hasn't been thoroughly discussed by the subcommittee and by this full committee. So it'd be nice to have it done by a town meeting, but if it is what it is. I mean, excuse me, I don't want to sound like the coach of the Patriots, but it is what it is. I think the more important thing is get the charge, do our due diligence. Jim.
I'm sorry for her.
No,
So
no.
I didn't know you had that. So if you've got enough of a parameter.
Well, pensions. Yeah.
All right, okay, but I mean, you could start with,
Sure.
I'm sorry to argue, it's the Jesuit training, both sides.
I did the same thing.
You could start with an assessment of the current state.
Absolutely.
And
That's my
there's probably some stuff you need
There's
to
stuff
do.
we could do.
Without having a charge.
That's correct.
Like an assessment and.
That's all.
and,
That's
you know,
correct.
Okay, so that's.
So we could. I mean, maybe I'm not being clear. I am being very comfortable if we agree, this committee agreed to take our membership and get things rolling along. And in fact, I would even serve as scheduling the times and the posting and all that stuff kind of
So
thing.
do you need a motion to do that, or?
I don't know if we need a motion. I think
it's a good idea to do it.
well, how about this? Instead of a motion, how about a show of hands to formulate the committee tonight? How about a show of hands? 1, 2, 3. Oh, all right. That's unanimous. Great. Okay. Then the next step would be for a membership. My first thought was 3 or 4 members. And I was kind of leaning toward 4, but that's again what we all decide together. So, how do we feel about 4? Anything against 4 is fine. 4 is fine. Anybody?
Quick question.
Oh, Dan?
The committee operate in an open meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think yes. We will. And until further notice. I never want to say no and then whoops, kind of thing. So if there are things that can be done, that should be done in executive session that way, then yes, that can be.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
question. So at what point does a committee, subcommittee, appointed group
Yep.
drop out of open meeting law, or does it never?
Well,
I mean, anytime the town assembles a group of people, you're always open meeting.
I think that's a safe answer, but if you're talking about, say, contract negotiations, there are some topics, there are some aspects of that topic that can be discussed and should be discussed in an executive session. So, what it suggests is this subcommittee would start out an open session, and as the areas are looked at to investigate, if some of them need to be done in executive session, then that option exists. Is that
Mr. Chairman, and
That's how the original committee was formulated, too. There would be open meetings, but there was the opportunity to go into executive session.
Yeah, and I think it's the same way it applies. But for my rules, I always want to, always try to keep things open unless, again.
I guess I was also curious about whether, every time you have a group that gets together, do you have to have minuted, meetings? Okay. Sorry.
That's the open
Okay.
meeting law. That is the open meeting. That is the environment we are in now. That's not our, that's a
Yeah.
Commonwealth.
Okay.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Okay, so getting back to 4 sounds reasonable?
Fine.
Okay. Now, the parameter is pensions. Housing is not on this list. That the selectmen did not say that, so we'll leave it as pensions. Would we have a comfortable thing for show of hands who'd be interested in that kind of thing first? Then we can go from there. If there's only 4, then we're all set. If there's more, we can do just like we do officers, or that'd be what I'd be most comfortable.
Sounds good.
Instead of let's go and pick. That's what I'm trying to avoid. So why do a show of hands who would want to be on this committee? 1, 2, 3. We have 3. Anyone else? Going once, going twice? We got 3. So, thank you very much. So, Joe, Cliff, and Craig. Why don't, let's see, so that's good. I'm trying to think the next step.
Well, next step should be when you say pensions, what exactly do you mean, pensions?
Well, we can decide we're going to get a charge.
Okay.
That's number 1. And number 2, as Jim said, even in the meantime, like schedule a meeting. Hopefully by the time the meeting is scheduled, the charge will come on out, because that was what we talked about last week. It'll be this week that the charge will come out. How about, let's see, today's Monday. How about scheduling a meeting, if we can get a space, say 3 o'clock on Thursday? Would that work? With throwing something out.
This Thursday?
This Thursday, yeah.
No, I'm going away Thursday night. Have to go to.
Okay. So 3 o'clock wouldn't work.
3 probably would work.
I
Thursday.
said Thursday night.
Okay. 3 o'clock.
How about for you, Craig?
I'm checking quickly here. So this Thursday, the 29th?
Yeah. 3 o'clock. We just
Sure.
have to find out a place, which we'll look into. All right, so why don't we plan on that, 3 o'clock. Just got to find a place. Hopefully we'll be downstairs and get things rolling. I will be there, but I won't be part of the subcommittee, but just get things rolling along. Okay? Christie?
If you could post some meetings, I'm not particularly experienced in pensions, it's better out of my hands, but I'd be very happy to go
Well, why don't you
and learn a little bit,
Yeah,
and
you can
sit
participate.
in.
We need one more member.
Yeah, jump in.
I'm okay with that. But I'll attend when I can.
All right. Well, yes, we'll post them just like any other meeting, and we'll announce them here.
Okay, and just
Yeah.
as an FYI, Mr. Chairman, as I think Matt knows, I'm off island from February 4th till the 11th.
Okay.
So I'm going to miss a couple of these meetings, and I don't know in terms of how the subcommittee will work, but
Well, that's you guys
unavoidably
decide.
I'm gone, so,
Well, that's one of the things to talk about on Thursday.
okay.
So what we'll do, we'll post something, I'll just put an agenda up, and pretty much it'll be a short agenda, and then that's one of the things to discuss. So hopefully I have a charge by then. Okay?
Super.
Any other thing, any comments weigh in that I'm leaving out? We do have a meeting scheduled tomorrow, which we're going to talk about the warrant, but being the weather, what's everyone's feelings on that? Assuming that,
You want a forecast?
no. Well, how about assuming the police or the town manager says you can't meet tomorrow? What do you guys feel? Do you want to meet? That's the
If I could, I think, is it just the warrant?
pretty much talk. We got to overview the warrant.
I'd be more up to cancel it. And just wait.
We could. That's why I'm not inclined either way.
I just feel like we're waiting on hearing from Andrew.
Well, a lot of that is. But what I envision is that the town manager would be here and just go through.
Oh, there's
Just
a
get
lot
an
of other
overview.
articles.
Just to give an overview.
The full thing?
Yeah, just a good overview. And so the idea behind it is, the advantage is to just to see it and talk about it and get an idea. That's all.
I'm fine
But,
with it.
you know, weather-wise, we may not want to meet, so I don't want to
What's the
decide.
latest you can cancel it?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow, like, say around, noon time, how about that? That'd be the latest. If the weather, again, you might say, the police chief might say.
email
to
us.
All right, well, do you want to keep it scheduled?
Yeah, and if
Is
it's
that
really
school?
bad, you can just cancel.
Just cancel it,
All right, fair enough. So we keep it as scheduled, 4:30 at the school,
assuming Libby would come.
assuming she, well, in talking right now, she is.
Okay.
Because you're right, because it would be no point if she's not coming. All right, well, we'll leave it on. When I hear something different, I'll send an email out. All right, now, so that's the date of the next meeting. If it does get canceled, we have a meeting on Thursday downstairs at 4 o'clock. Okay? And then one last thing, just to reiterate, and maybe I should explain a little bit more about. Oh, let me just. Town offices are going to be closed tomorrow. Committees can potentially meet, but they may not have town staff.
Which means, I
We can't get to the school.
I'll attend that.
All right, you know what? We'll leave it. Well, we probably will end up canceling, but let's leave it now, and I'll just send an email out to be sure. That's all. Probably be canceling.
That is the high
Oh,
school.
you know what?
Yeah.
There's a statewide travel.
Can we get in?
That's it. We probably cannot.
It sounds.
It doesn't look good.
Let's till,
Well, do you want to revisit that?
bad till when, Brian?
Cancel.
Let's cancel.
Everybody okay with that?
I can look through it.
All right.
I haven't looked through the one yet. I just like to go through it.
All right, so we'll go ahead and cancel. The next meeting is on Thursday, then, downstairs? At 4 o'clock?
Cancel.
All right. All right. And then just one last thing to go over before we go. It's our request of information. I would just want to ask that we go either here at an open meeting or an email to me that I can send on to Brian and Martin. The reason why is that maybe I'm a little bit sensitive about this, is I want to be sure that every member has equal access and gets equal response, because truthfully, a number of years ago, before Jim, you were chairman, and that wasn't always the case. So I always want to go out of my way, and I want to be sure that we're all treated fairly, as everyone gets the same information. So I just want to go over that. Any request certainly is welcome. It's just either go through me or do it here at an open meeting that we all can hear it. Okay? Other than that, I think then we're... Yeah, sure.
To do with the meeting thing, through you to maybe Martin or somebody, could I request that I get, because I was looking at that chart due to the, for pensions, I was going to get a salary through the FERS program, and get the breakdown, and maybe get a breakdown, find a similar salary in the town. Just, we'll black out the names and just show the comparison of what the government pays in the FERS program for a pension versus what the town pays in their pension.
Can we do that?
I'm not quite sure I follow.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either. That's one.
Well, just like you can look up my, you get a W-2, and I pay so much in taxes, and I pay so much to my pension, and same thing for I would get that from you, breakdown of someone's payroll, deductions, and what they pay, what the town.
I can tell you right off the bat, I mean, there's been about 3 or 4 itinerations since along the way but right now, for all new hires, it's about a blended average of roughly about, you pay 9% plus 2% on everything over $30,000 for new hires. Depending on when you were hired, you could pay anywhere between 5 and 9%. Some people pay 5, some people pay 7. There's been different steps along the way that the CARE Act has done. So if you want every single person, that's going to take an awful lot of work.
No. I was going to take someone making $75,000, and I was going to get.
Right, but it may be different. Okay, you have to understand, because if you were hired in 1975, then your contribution to the pension system is going to be different than, just use me as an example, than what mine is today.
And so
I can
probably focus on what's
Yeah,
current.
well, can you maybe make an explanation like you just did and write it down? And
Yeah, you can do that.
Perfect. Not to burden you anymore with what you're doing, but.
Okay. All right. Good. All right.
Can just, Matt, to go back to the issue on questions to Martin or anybody, Libby or anybody else. I mean, I hear you. I was the guilty party on this one, I guess.
That's fine. There's
But-
no-
We've
there's
all,
no-
we've all been there.
Well, no, but I guess I would just, is it okay if I'm going to send it to you? Can I CC Martin because?
Well, I would actually, to go one step further, I would really prefer that if you have questions, that they come through me.
That's
Because
fine.
sending them to Martin, I may have things that I want him to do, or he's in the middle of for me, so it would be, I would just ask if you're going to do that. I don't care, if you're okay with it, you can copy me on it at the same time. More than likely, Martin's going to work on it, but given the fact that we could be working on something, I just prefer to know what is being asked, that's all.
Right. No, that's great guidance because, I mean, part of what it was today was, it was literally, I was reading, some of the stuff and I said, gee, I don't understand this. I didn't really want to bother anybody, but, all right, so.
And it's
But it's okay, if it's okay to send it to Matt and CC you guys,
And that's- yeah.
because if it's a nit and you can say yes, or the answer is 5, otherwise, you end up waiting to the end of the day when you can come back and it loops around and just seems kind of,
I understand.
okay.
Jim?
Well, wasn't there an issue too about having those kinds of email exchanges as a violation of open meeting law?
That's another
So
concern.
that was the reason that they went all through the chairman.
Yep.
And the chairman, as the committee asked for, rather than CCing all that kind of stuff, because we had an alleged violation of the open meeting law because we were having conversations between staff and individual committee members, was my recollection.
That's a concern, too.
So that's the reason to do it just through Matt.
Okay.
The CCing, if you're comfortable with that, is fine.
I'm fine if the committee member wants to send it to you and CC me.
Okay,
I have
fair
no
enough.
problem with that. The only reason I'm asking is I just don't want Martin to get overwhelmed with maybe stuff that I
Yeah,
would answer or whatever. It makes it a little easier for me.
That point's fine. My point is that that all members will have access.
Absolutely.
That's my point. Okay. All right, that's fine. We can do that. So date of the next meeting then is the 29th. Fair enough?
So what's that,
Thursday.
Okay.
All right. So we'll we'll have the warrant, hopefully, Martin, I may change the warrant, and we'll try to put the warrant on Thursday, if we can do some of that too. I have to look at it.
It seems to make sense. That's the
Oh,
way
so we
I
can do
look
that.
at it.
Yeah, we'll do that. Then we'll do that. That's what we'll do. All right, there a motion to adjourn?
4 or 5. I don't understand.
Hour legal.
I saw the email. Frankly, I think they should be a resource for all members.
Yeah, we'll do that. And
I
then,
mean, if it was like, Martin, can you write me a report? I would send it.
My guilt is better just that one little question can be answered in 2 minutes. And rather than make a big deal out of it, I didn't know. That's right.
No, and if the rules, the rules, that's fine.